my friends, and welcome to Quartet. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and it's great to have you. First of all, let's run around the table and say, what have you all been thinking about? And so, Gregg, let's start with you. What's been on your mind?
What I've learned is when the media focuses on an event, everybody's looking over here and there's usually something else going on, and that's my concern. The question is, what are we being diverted away from through the Ukraine, what's happening in Ukraine and Russia? One of the things that is on my radar, that very few people are talking about, is that our administration refused to allow the Emergency Powers Act to expire on March 1st, where many nations and even our own individual states are declaring an end to the emergencies. And also what's happening, the ongoing collapse of the global financial system, which may be part of what's happening between Russia and Ukraine.
A lot of stuff about the truckers, the coming trucker convoy, that's been on my radar. When I was doing my look-see, it looked like the American version of that was not nearly as smooth or as well polished or as polite as the Canadian one. And it becomes a turning point, a really specific turning point for a lot of people in America, the whole Russia and Ukraine thing. I also see that as a huge distraction, because when you read stuff out of Russia, they're saying, no, we're not invading. No, we're not. We're not doing that. And then another thing that I read just recently, a couple of days ago, was that Ukraine had never filed with any of the legal bodies in the world to establish its borders. So technically, it's still part of Russia. Looking at the underbelly side of that whole thing in Russia, it does just look like a big distracting psyop, meant to.
Russia, Ukraine, we have to talk about it in some way, because it's a manufactured narrative. And that's what's been on my mind about how these grand narratives are being manufactured to move from one phase to the next. As you remember, a year ago, the World Economic Forum brought out the Great Reset book to establish the narrative of the pandemic. Now, just I think 6 weeks ago, they brought out a follow-up book called The Great Narrative. Exactly what we're talking about, how you construct narratives. So I went online to look at some reviews of this great narrative to see if people are swallowing it as easily as they did the first book, because the Great Reset got like 4 or 5 stars. Interestingly, everyone's been putting 1 star. Here's one comment: a wonderful insight into the billionaire sociopath's mind. Another one: Klaus Schwab tells you in no uncertain terms how you are expendable. All 1 stars. Whereas the great narrative that the WF was spinning with the reset more or less got swallowed as a kind of solution narrative by many readers, this one, coming on the back of that, we're seeing people kind of waking up and realizing that this is a construction.
So I've been impressed watching the kind of the wind down, if you will, of the first stage, at least, of the Canadian situation. And what impressed me was the fact that I think that this has fundamentally changed the Canadian people, that they have a dramatically different idea and concept of their government going forward, because they have watched something happen that they probably never thought would happen when Trudeau wouldn't even talk to the truckers, and then they just move directly into violence. What I found fascinating was that I sat down and read the whole hour-long press announcement that Putin made yesterday. And it was fascinating. It was logical. It was reasonable. It made all kinds of sense from their point of view. And it just impressed me that it was kind of qualitatively so much different than what we see from so many other international, national leaders. So let's turn to some questions. This is Rebecca Stearns, our friend Rebecca. Gregg spoke about how blockchain is a peer-to-peer system that allows us to implement our values. I would like to have some more understanding of number one, what makes this so? Number two, how do you go about moving money out of banks into this type of digital asset? And number three, why this type of currency holds its value? Thank you very much.
The the blockchain technology in general is a relatively new technology that makes Bitcoin possible. It is an implementation that's only possible because of a blockchain. It is so successful and it is so threatening to the status quo and the powers that be that they are doing their very best to spin this in the media as something that we don't want, something that is threatening, something that is negative. What makes it valuable, its intrinsic value, is in its transparency. For the first time in the history of money, we have a transparent ledger, a record of every transaction that has led to the Bitcoin that you own on your account. So it's impossible to manipulate it. Your Bitcoin, you can't do the things with Bitcoin that are being done with the fiat currency of the US dollar. To move money out of the banks seems like it would be easy because it's our money. Our banks are already putting capital controls on the money. How much money can leave the country, how much money you can take out of your account at any one time. If you exceed, I believe right now, a $10,000 limit, there's paperwork that has to be filled out. So the capital controls have already started. So it does take energy to generate the Bitcoin. When you compare that to the global banking system that we have right now, it takes much less energy. So if you think about physical locations, central banks, heating, lights, air conditioning, ATMs, all of the energy that goes into those, what the estimates are right now is that the global banking system takes about 263.7 terawatt hours per year. Bitcoin is roughly half of that, 113.8 terawatt hours per year. This is from Galaxy Digital. And it's improving because Bitcoin now is being generated largely from renewable energy or from what are called stranded sources of energy. So the gas, for example, that used to burn off in an oil field, they're now capturing that gas and channeling it. Texas is a Bitcoin capital now.
Clint Norton, along the same line, says, how does blockchain technology work if the support system that maintains the internet breaks down or disappears? Let me tell you something, Clint. If the internet breaks down and disappears, you got a whole lot of other problems, and you're not going to be worrying about your blockchain. By the way, it'll go away, but so will GPS and gas pumps and on and on and on. Somebody asked, the $1 trillion question is, who invented Bitcoin? Well, that is a good question. The best guess that I know of, from having spent some amount of time looking at it. Of course, the advertised kind of originator of this is some guy named Nakasone or something like that, a Japanese name, and nobody knows who he is. Has had no idea at all. But if you run those trap lines and you run back, what you come to the conclusion, or at least I did, is that it's coming out of the NSA, and that they conceived of this whole thing and then sent it out. And that being the case, I can assure you that they know how to get inside of this.
Well, so Satoshi Nakamoto is a pseudonym. There was a lawsuit recently. A man sued, and the court awarded him the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto, although it hasn't been proven. So it's believed to be a consortium.
Ben Levy asked our last question. I'm going to ask Penny and Kingsley to respond to this. He says, I'm not clear that it's a good idea to craft a new economic system that requires huge amounts of electricity and internet and global structures in order to function. We're assuming all of that must exist in the New World Order. But is that a reasonable assumption given all the supply chain breakdowns, et cetera, we're looking at?
I really, really like the cryptocurrency for a couple different reasons. But the main thing is that when you step back and you look at the big picture, that cryptocurrency is a digital thing. It's not a material thing. And our entire civilization is slowly moving towards something less material. I'm going to say towards something that's more fourth dimensional or fifth dimensional in nature. And when you take all of the money and you make that something that isn't material, you've taken that first step into that new civilization that is less materially dense. And how you do it is really with nanotechnology and a few other things kind of thrown in there. If you know how nanotechnology actually works, it's like, oh, there it is. Things become less materially dense. But if it isn't followed with the mental, emotional, perceptual thing that says, okay, we're going to trust that we can, have a financial system that isn't based in something that we can put our hands on.
We all live in different aspects of the complex system. I don't think it's unified amongst everyone. People live in their different economic worlds or realities. People have always kind of established what is their economic system for them. I mean, as I mentioned last time we spoke, economy is an energetic exchange, and people have different necessities for exchange. Now, I remember, when I was living in southern Spain, all my neighbors, they didn't trust banks. They never did do. So when I asked them, what do you do with your money? And they said, well, we put it into the ground, into the earth. We put it into the land, because that had value for them. And they could work on that. They could build on it. They could trade it. They could sell it. But there's going to be people all over the planet who are going to say, well, my degree of exchange is going to be something different. I may get paid by someone over there in cryptocurrency, but in my world, in my economic world, I have a different value system. I want to put something into something tangible. I want to put it into different kinds of assets. I want to put it into something which has worth for me. I know, for example, that my parents won't be able to touch cryptocurrencies because they just don't have any ability to understand technology. So they have a different value system, and they'll want to work with that.
And we want to talk about what the implications are if there's an energy revolution on this planet. This is important because energy is the basis of everything that we do. You can essentially track the evolution of our species based upon the changes in terms of the type and access of energy, going back to fire and coal and oil and so on. What I know is that there are technologies that have been kind of disappeared into the black world of classified programs and things that have amazing kind of capabilities. And it takes what's estimated to be 50 to 70 years before these things, which already work and they're fielding them other places, like in satellites in the sky. It takes that long before it kind of works its way out into the commercial, into the open, into the white world. And so there are kind of two kind of forces coming together to suggest that there's going to be an energy revolution. That energy revolution is built regardless of how one approaches it, whether it's cold fusion or whether it's rotational magnets or whatever it turns out to be, is all about producing usable output from no input, effectively no input once you get the things up and running. And so what you've got is a push from the universe or the system or the cosmos, if you will, to push for the emergence of a new energy source and a new energy technologies.
Most of our viewers know that I am, my primary degree is in the earth sciences. I'm a degreed geologist with a background in geophysics. And I can tell you we are already in the cooling cycle. It doesn't happen everywhere all at once. We're in that cooling cycle. I actually just published a documentary called The Dirty Secret of Green Energy. There are 3 phases to the cycles of green energy. There's the production phase, the use, and then the end of life, or what happens when the solar panels are no longer usable. Solar panels, windmills are some of the most toxic forms of energy to produce, energy intensive to produce, requiring rare earth minerals that are concentrated primarily in China and Russia right now. Limited supplies, it's not sustainable. I'm close to Los Alamos, where the Manhattan Project happened. And when you study Los Alamos, what you find is those scientists during the World War II, they went through every element on the periodic table to find elements that would produce energy. They chose uranium because we were in a war and they wanted the byproduct, which is plutonium. What you rarely hear about is there's another element that produces electricity with zero greenhouse gases. It is inexpensive, it's abundant in the Earth's crust, it cannot be weaponized, it cannot melt down like Fukushima, and the waste can be recycled into the next fuel cycle, and it's called thorium. This is being downplayed as a form of baseload energy in America. Even Wikipedia says it's experimental. That's absolutely not true, and I will stand behind that. In a very short period of time, we could have thorium generators up and running as the stepping stone, not the answer, the stepping stone to ultimately what you're talking about, John, is vacuum energy from the Planck vacuum, which we will have.
We got a letter this morning saying that our electricity bills will be going up 50% this year. In Europe, energy is a really problematic issue right now. We really have to be pushed our backs against the walls to catalyze revolutions. We know that that's what occurs. And I get a sense that in these years coming, there's going to be our backs pushed against the walls in terms of energy, because energy and economics are the two spine backbones that of the same creature. And I want to tie it back to what's happening now in Ukraine and Russia, because I think that could be a catalyst for Europe at least. Because as we mentioned, there's a narrative around, war and going into Ukraine. And President Biden actually made a statement saying that one of the sanctions they're going to put on Ukraine is to not allow the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So what that shows you, of course, is that energy is an asset for control, blackmail, manipulation. But we know that when we get past the threshold, the energy has to be a universally available energy for everybody that cannot be under ownership, which is why I feel that in the interim, anything which comes out, of course, the major global energy companies are going to want to jump on it to monopolize it as another source of control and profit. So my sense is that there's going to be these two kind of parallel streams whereby tangible energy technology is going to be coming out. But at the same time, we need to see on the periphery or under the radar, the non-tangible energy. My sense is that further closer to us would be something like magnetic energy.
I'm just so aware of the fact that we have a number of transitions to go through. And then every so often I think about the fact that, okay, we have this thing called psychic ability. What is that based on? It's based on the transfer of some kind of energy. What is the basis of that transfer of energy? Why are we investigating that, developing that? Well, there are a few people who have done some things along those lines. And then there's the work that we did in the lab, which was assessing natural flows of energy and how to boost those in order to create a literal effect in whatever it was, water, metal, stones, plants, how to release the natural energy within things. And so, when I talked earlier about nanoparticles or nanotechnology, from my point of view, and this might be not the best way to present it, but what nanotechnology does is take a whole bunch of particles that are all in electromagnetic relationship with one another and allows those to spread out quite a bit while keeping the electrical or electromagnetic connections between them. When you do that, you end up with something that is much less dense materially. It's lighter, and therefore it's easier to move, it's easier to power, and it has options that you don't have when you got this heavy, dense thing. We are on the edge of an energy revolution. What I see is all these bits and pieces that have to come together, but I don't see the political will. I don't see the economic will. And I think it's going to come down to getting around that current form of political and economic blockade. The energy revolution, I think, has to be accompanied by a people revolution in which they take matters into their own hands. What is the basic carrier of all of the energies? It's ether.
Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you.